Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
We'll be kicking off our show talking about the Oscars that just aired, putting a final point on those 2013 releases we've been talking about the last couple months. And new releases this week include Non-Stop, Liam Neeson's latest action movie. As such, we'll also be counting down our top 5 movies that take place on an airplane. Our triple feature is new classic Goon, starring Seann William Scott, old classic chosen by me, the 80s comedy Baby Boom, and the Oscar nominee A to Z this week is our oldest one yet, 1929's Alibi. First, though, we're going to talk about the Oscars, and if you listened to our mini-sode that we posted just a couple of weeks ago with show correspondent Tim, we all gave our picks for who we thought will win at the Oscars this Sunday, and Justin's got the final wrap-up on that.
Okay, so for the turnout with the mini-sode, it turns out that we have our winner, Dan, who got 6 out of the 8 that we chose for the mini-sode correct, and Joe and I had a tie of 5 alongside Tim. Joe did not guess actress correctly. However, he was the only one out of our group that guessed Best Picture, so that got him up to 5 instead of what would have been his 4.
Yeah, I believe I said American Hustle, and you and Tim both said Gravity, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so good job on that, Joe.
Well, hey, I got the big one.
We only wanted to get the big one, yeah.
The one that matters.
Just a quick wrap-up on that. Best Picture did go to 12 Years a Slave, like we just said. Best Director went to Gravity, as did pretty much all of the technical awards, things like Best Sound Editing and Best Original Score, Best Sound Mixing, Visual Effects, all of that stuff. Adapted Screenplay went to 12 Years a Slave. I think we all pretty much called that one. And Best Original Screenplay went to Her. And the acting went to Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto for Dallas Buyers Club. The actresses went to Cate Blanchett for Blue Jasmine and Lupita Nyong'o for 12 Years a Slave. Her first movie ever. And she nets a Best Supporting Actress Oscar.
That was pretty impressive.
That's one heck of an achievement.
Very impressive. We all thought, I mean, it was pretty close, I think, for all of us to pick between her and Jennifer Lawrence. Those were the two front runners. Mm-hmm. But I was pretty sure Jennifer Lawrence was actually going to get it.
I was too, actually.
Yeah, and in fact, I was a little bit annoyed when they called Lupita Nyong'o, but to see her on Ellen the next day just talking about I was like, you know what? She did give an incredible performance.
And a pretty good acceptance speech, too.
She did. She gave a great speech. Yeah. You know how they say, like, you know, so-and-so's having a moment? Mm-hmm. Lupita Nyong'o is having a moment.
Like, I think that might very well be, like, one of the best moments of her life.
First of all, her birthday was Saturday. So this is her birthday weekend. She wins an Oscar for the first movie she's ever been in, and her second movie opens at number 1, Non-Stop.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a pretty good week.
She is having a moment for sure.
That's good stuff for her.
Yeah.
It's really good.
So just some of the other quick awards here. The Best Animated Feature went to Frozen. We all called that. The Best Documentary Feature went to 20 Feet from Stardom, which we just talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago as a home media moment. And actually, this episode's home media moment, The Act of Killing, was also up for Best Documentary Feature, so we'll discuss that in a little bit. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a pretty good Oscars. I thought Ellen did a really good job. I know, Justin, you thought she played it a little safe.
I felt after we had Seth MacFarlane, who was some considered a little too wild for the Academy Awards, they wanted to try and play it between the lines. I like Ellen generally speaking. I think she's fun. I think she's entertaining.
I think everybody does.
Exactly. She's just that kind of likable person.
Yeah.
But for the Academy Awards, it just seemed like she was doing her usual shtick. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. It wasn't anything awful either. I did like the fact that she was trying to find ways to make the actors seem a little more down to earth and human, instead of these like larger than life celebrities that they are 95% of the time.
And make them comfortable on a night that many of them are nervous.
And I agree with you. I just thought she was okay. She wasn't anything really all that special on her sophomore attempt at hosting. I really hope that they can get some like fresh new talent for next Oscars that's really going to blow us out of the water. I personally thought Seth MacFarlane was pretty good, albeit that may have been swayed by the fact that we had Billy Crystal one year that was just sort of like Ellen, just sort of doing his usual thing, and the hosts before him were just sort of there as well. But overall, for Ellen's role as host, I'd probably give her like a B-.
But see, that's why they picked her, because she's liked by pretty much everyone, and she is a safe comic. They're not going to have to worry about, different groups coming after her like they came out.
Backlash.
Like they came after Seth MacFarlane. Yeah, they don't have to worry about the backlash when they pick Ellen. It's why they keep going back to the Billy Crystal well also. Personally, I'm fine with it. I think funny is funny. You don't have to be vulgar. Did I think Seth MacFarlane did a good job? I actually did, even though I don't particularly like him. And I didn't find it offensive, but obviously a lot of people did. So you pick Ellen because she's funny and she's safe. Joe, what did you think? You didn't get to see the whole show, but you saw the bulk of it.
I saw about 60% of it. I thought she was pretty good. She kept things flowing. I don't know if she was always funny, but she was always likable. She does have that kind of magnetic personality. I thought she held the show pretty well together. It was very down to earth, and I did like that. So I do agree. I think she was pretty good. I don't know if I'd say she gave the best hosting ever, but I thought she did a good job. I would say it was a solid hosting.
Well, it definitely worked for the Academy. The ratings were the best in over a decade. And actually, it's the biggest entertainment show rating since the Friends finale, and that would have been 10 years ago.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So somebody liked
it. It definitely worked. You pick a host that is likable.
And well-known.
You pick movies that a lot of people have seen. There were no real wild cards in the Best Picture race this year.
I think that the Academy is definitely trying to stick more with the mainstream now. They want to get the pulse of what's going on with the general viewer.
And honestly, I think that's good. Would I've liked to see some of the lesser-known movies we've talked many times on the show about Short Term 12? Of course. But I mean, I can't begrudge them for having a list of really, really solid movies that people have seen.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I know we've talked about that before, where it does seem like it might be unfair to some films, but generally people are going to watch it if they care about it, and this was a great way to get people interested in the film and the Academy.
Well, I think we had some exciting races too, because you had, Matthew McConaughey is having this big comeback. Leo DiCaprio, is he finally going to get an award?
No.
They had, he didn't, obviously. And you've got Jared Leto, who has not only fans of Dallas Buyers Club and his acting, but tons of, music fans for his band 30 Seconds to Mars. I think there were a lot of good stories this year, and Ellen is a competent host that people like.
Mm-hmm. Overall, I thought it was a success, but there is one question I wanted to ask you guys.
Yeah, go on.
American Hustle was really, really pushed, being nominated in all these categories.
Shut out completely.
And it was like, they made it seem like it was going to be this big contender. Personally, I know Justin and I didn't feel like it really was at the same caliber. I know you liked it more than we did, but even so, why bother nominating it as much as Gravity and then really giving it basically nothing? It seemed like, we should have balanced it out with some other films, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the Academy doesn't start voting until most of the other award shows are done. They vote after the Golden Globes, they vote after the SAG Awards have all been announced. So there's a lot of changing tides, I think, and what started out as an early three-way race between American Hustle, Gravity, and 12 Years a Slave, sort of the last few weeks transformed into more of a race between just the two. So, I don't know. Justin, what do you think?
Every year there's always one movie at the Oscars that tends to get shut out. Unfortunately, this year it was American Hustle. I was absolutely polling and hoping that there would be an upset for Best Actress. I can't say I'm entirely surprised. We knew she was going to get it, but hopefully Adams gets recognized sometime this century, because it needs to happen.
Yeah.
It will.
All right, well, good show overall, and I'm not going to talk about the 2013 movies anymore for a while, probably on some new classics in, the months ahead, but...
Possibly.
Yeah. But for now, let's get to this week's new releases, and the first one, just to touch upon, is actually an old release that was re-rated and re-released this week in a expanded format, and that's Anchorman 2. Justin and I saw that. Only having seen the original once, I definitely did not pick up on the more than 700 jokes from the original Anchorman 2 version, but there were some that I definitely did notice and like more, and some of which I preferred the original line. The issue with the new version is the extra 25 minutes. It definitely makes the story drag. I would have preferred if they just cut things out and replaced them rather than tack on all the extra stuff plus replacing the jokes. And if this were the only version out, I would probably give it a C+. Justin, what do you think?
Oh, wow. Okay. Anchorman 2 is just, the R-rated version that is just one of those examples of just because you can doesn't mean you should. With the original Anchorman, they did something like this as well. They restructured the original film into a 90-minute movie and attached it to the DVD, and the reception was about as warmly as it was for the R-rated cut of Anchorman 2. It just feels wholly unnecessary. Like, the jokes aren't that funny. Some of the best ones from the original theatrical cut are cut short or extended to the point that they're just awkward. And as you mentioned, Dan, it just runs on entirely too long. I was fighting to stay focused. It's just a completely unnecessary, uncomfortable restructuring of a film that ruins a lot of the comedic timing that was there in the original cut, and I would probably give it like a D+.
Oh, see, I still laughed, and I did think some of the song, I thought the song number was good, that wasn't in the first one at all, and I thought some of the jokes were better, but yeah, I mean, I don't know that it was necessary. It's a DVD bonus is basically what it should have been. I did find out an interesting tidbit about Anchorman 2, though, as I was sort of looking it up.
Go on.
It was the last film that Paramount has released in the 35mm format.
Really?
The first ever, from any studio, all-digital film came out the next week, and that was The Wolf of Wall Street. So Paramount Pictures now done completely with 35mm.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Little tidbit.
Yeah.
Fun Anchorman 2. All right, well, now the all-new releases, and we're going to start with Non-Stop. Joe?
Non-Stop is a 2014 mystery thriller directed by Jaume Collet-Serra and starring Liam Neeson and Julianne Moore. Liam Neeson plays Bill Marks, an alcoholic federal air marshal with a moderate fear of flying and a tragic past. After boarding a flight to London, Marks gets a threatening message on his phone as a mysterious person claims he will kill someone on the plane every 20 minutes unless a massive amount of money is transferred into an account. At first, this seems like a terrorist threat, but quickly evolves into an elaborate setup, with the account being in Mark's name and the killer seeming to be one step ahead of him at every turn, with each death being blamed on him. The clock is ticking as Marks must stop the killer, clear his name, and resolve his own personal demons along the way. This movie is actually a little less of an action movie and more of a murder mystery. It has a slow build-up and really does take its time building up the suspense. It also does well at keeping the audience guessing, and the situation looks so grim that the stakes are made very high. Therefore, you honestly aren't sure if Liam Neeson will save the day this time. When the action does come through, it is pretty decent. Neeson and Moore give good performances and do well to flesh out some fairly simply written characters. The film does establish the basics about the two leads quickly, but does add a bit more depth as the story moves on. It also does have an interesting, if not slightly forced twist, which does play on an old theme of the past decade or so. The only real problem I had with this movie was the fact that there were points where the villains' plans were so elaborate and all-knowing that it was rather unbelievable. The villains themselves were a bit of a mixed bag, being underdeveloped and with confusing motivations. Still, I would be lying if I said that the idea wasn't clever, though it wasn't really fleshed out enough. And the film never bored me and was actually rather entertaining, and even a bit thrilling at times. I give it a B-.
Justin, what'd you think of Non-Stop?
What was great about the film Unknown, also done by the film's director, was that it had a story that took its time but continued to draw one in without spelling everything out. Sadly, that's the exact opposite with the case of Non-Stop, which starts out interesting and then loses itself as more of the mystery comes to light. However, as the main dilemma starts to unfold in the first two acts, it is surprisingly engaging, particularly with the motif of cell phone texts. That said, it can get rather repetitive and silly at times, and the final reveal comes off as rather out of nowhere instead of being the shocking twist it wants to be. Though for being a slight improvement over much of the drivel that has come out in the first 2 months of 2014, I will give credit where credit is due, and I give Non-Stop a B-.
Oh yeah.
Same grade. I actually really liked this. I think Liam Neeson has really carved out a nice action niche for himself for his second act in film, and it's one of the better ones in the Neeson canon. It's got a good premise, and there's a solid mystery element to it, like Joe mentioned. It's sort of a cross between the other two best Neeson thrillers, which is Unknown, as Justin mentioned, and the original Taken. The action gets a little chaotic during the finale, gets a little hard to follow, who's shooting who, what's going on. But I overall really did like it. Like Joe, I did not get bored with it at all. I didn't think the build-up was actually that slow, though. I was pretty into it from the start. They obviously have their their focus is, where they want you to think it's such and such, and it's not them. But
I guess I meant the setup in terms of like building up the characters. It took its time establishing them and setting the mood. I'm not saying it was like bad pacing. I said it takes its time.
Okay, I see what you mean. I think overall I would actually call this a non-stop thrill ride, pun intended, and I'm going to give it a B+.
Oh, wow, nice.
I think action's one of the hardest genres to grade, because like we sort of talked about with Escape Plan, which you and I like, Joe, more than Justin, almost every action movie has some sense of a check your brain at the door kind of mentality. You don't go to see an action movie to think.
9 times out of 10.
9 times out of 10. So I kind of liked that there was this mystery element to it. It was sort of like unknown in the respect that you didn't exactly know what was going on.
Well, it was kind of a blend, like I said. I mean, it was a bit of an action movie towards like maybe the last act, but up till then it was really trying to be a mystery thriller.
Yeah, I'd say thriller probably suits it more than action.
I'd say it's listed as a thriller, and I think that's fitting.
Okay.
So, like I said, I think it was marketed a little more as an action film because Liam Neeson, people expect that now.
Yeah.
But it's a little more dynamic than that.
I like to see him broadening his horizons a little bit, too.
He's done various different things in the past, but it does seem like action is generally his niche these days.
Yeah, I mean, back in the old days when he did all of the dramas,
Rob
and the period
Roy,
pieces, Nell. It was nice to see him do the good cop bad cop character in Lego Movie.
Mm-hmm.
Nut Job was terrible, but at least he was branching out a little bit in that as well.
Yeah.
And like we say here, a little bit as well with the mystery stuff.
Yeah, I think overall it's a massive improvement, as Justin said, over a lot of the stuff we've been getting lately. And I do think it's a good movie.
Particularly last podcast.
Yeah, last podcast was pretty rough.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to it, all of the new releases got negative reviews. So
from everybody.
From all three of us. So it's a bad sign. All right, well, let's move on to Pompeii. Justin's going to tell us about that.
Milo, played by Kit Harington, is a slave who as a young boy saw his mother murdered by an evil Roman named Corvus, played by Kiefer Sutherland. As he begins to prove his worth as a gladiator, known only as the Celt, to the public of Pompeii, he attracts the attention of the ruler's daughter, Cassia, played by Emily Browning, as inevitable disaster comes their way. If the synopsis is of any indicator, director Paul W.S. Anderson has taken inspiration from many much better films, particularly Gladiator. Harrington may have found an audience on the small screen, but so far his transition to the silver screen has not been kind to him, seeming completely uncomfortable with the already weak script. Alongside the Gladiator parallel, he's paired with a similar warrior, in this case played by Adewale Akinoye Agbaje, who mumbles at least a quarter of his lines.
Instead of echoing.
Because he plays Mr. Echo.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. Hey, got to put it in there.
Very good.
The action sequences involving these two are cheap, choppy, and just not fun to watch, with far too much boring exposition between them until the infamous volcano finally erupts. These disaster sequences are hilariously done in post-transfer 3D, and it may quite possibly be the ugliest product since The Last Airbender, with numerous blurry shots and Ash constantly getting in the way. At only an hour and 45 minutes, Pompeii is a complete waste of time that should not have been ever made, and I give it an F.
This is your 4th F this year, Justin.
I will no regrets.
Yeah, slow your roll. Don't get me wrong, Justin. The movie is a big fat mess. It's completely humorless. The romantic story seems like it's attempting to be Jack and Rose from Titanic in almost every aspect, except the acting is horrible. You don't care about any of the people. With the possible exception of Atticus, played by Adewale from Lost. But he isn't even part of the romantic plot, so that doesn't matter.
Or is he?
Well, I guess he sort of helps a little bit, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it doesn't matter. Because
it really doesn't.
Of all the recent movies, this one really could have utilized the 3D, but instead, it's completely wasted here. Also, since nothing gets remotely interesting until the volcano starts getting going about an hour in, the first 2/3 of the movie are a complete bore. The special effects, aside from the 3D technology, are pretty decent, and Sutherland turns in an okay performance. I hated the ash falling all over the place, but it's Pompeii, so I think that's kind of to be expected, Justin. But those things are really all I can muster for this one, and it gets a D from me. Joe?
This movie is really just one big watered-down ripoff of The Gladiator. The acting is so bad that I didn't even recognize Kit Harington of Game of Thrones, who played the lead. Kiefer Sutherland seems to be having fun as the villain, but he's the only one. The movie doesn't understand action flicks, or even history for that matter, as it makes many, many basic errors about ancient Rome and its relation to Pompeii. The plot is pointless until the volcano comes, and by that point it doesn't really matter, because overall the action is dull, and the acting is pretty bad too for the most part. I'd say it's okay, but I've seen other films do far better with less in the same genre. It's boring and forgettable, and as Justin said, it's a waste of time. I give it an F.
Wow, your fourth F as well for the year. All right.
It's a pretty bad movie. What else
is
there to say?
No, it is bad. It is bad. I don't know. I mean, I never saw Gladiator, so maybe for me,
dude,
it didn't seem like
it's like
as much of a horrible
it's
desecration.
It's like cookie cutter. Like every plot point, even some of the same scenes are directly ripped off. Like the scene where Mr. Echo, I'm just gonna call him that, is like messing with the little statues of his gods and talking about his family. This is like an exact recreation.
Not to mention the way they're working together in the arena is almost a carbon copy.
It's like, how we're gonna break free from slavery? They'll betray you. Like it's really almost exactly the same.
Before the end of the year, I'm gonna watch Gladiator. Then
I know you don't want to,
but by the 2014 wrap up, maybe I'll be with you and give Pompeii an F as well.
Okay,
it certainly isn't good.
It's not.
No.
It was just really annoying because, I mean, if you're going to rip off a plot, I mean, that was a pretty good one.
At least do it well, if that's the case.
Exactly.
To me, it was a big Titanic ripoff.
The thing is, there were other tropes from other movies that were ripped off, and Titanic definitely was one of them.
Okay.
The whole two acting in this big disaster that they can't possibly get out of.
Star-crossed lovers.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But I do agree with you. I think Kiefer Sutherland is probably the best actor in the movie.
Yeah.
That wouldn't take much.
That, once again, doesn't take much. I thought he was having fun playing the bad guy. Though you have to say he's probably the most devoted bad guy ever, because you'd think everybody would just say, hey, there's a big volcano. Why are we still going after this guy? Like, they defied logic all the time. It was really... I'm sorry, it was just dumb. The whole movie was just dumb. From beginning to end.
Fair enough. I can't refute it. All right, well, let's move on to our next film, and that is Kids for Cash. This is a documentary about the illegal and horrifying actions of a Court of Common Pleas judge about an hour and a half away from where we record this very show in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. What exactly those illegal activities were is a bone of contention, and one that the judge himself, Mark Chevarella, explains his side of in the film. Did he receive kickbacks from a local juvenile detention center that he helped build? Did he send thousands of kids to this detention center that he shouldn't have for said kickbacks? Did he harass parents all over the county into not getting a lawyer for their child's case so he could send them up the river quicker? The film certainly makes the case for all of these things, and then some. Both Chevarella and a fellow judge involved, Michael Conahan, accused of many of the same crimes, are interviewed throughout this film, as are just a few of the 3,000 children and families who were affected by Chevarella's actions, all who have powerful stories to tell about their lost youth. The strongest part of Kids for Cash is that it really gets very well-spoken, competent interviews out of its subjects, especially the children involved, who are now no longer minors. But what a coup for the filmmakers to also get interviews with Chevarella, who attempts to curry the audience's favor, but got no sympathy from me, and whose lawyers didn't even know about these interviews when they took place. First-time director Robert May does a great job weaving the stories from the families in with people like the lawyers who help the families, and of course the judges involved also. What I didn't like about it was the constant metaphor pieces of like these dioramas in an attic that May kept going back to, and also I thought there were even more things to be explored that barely get brushed by. But especially for a first-time effort, it is a good documentary, and one that will likely enrage each viewer, and I give Kids for Cash a B+. Justin, what did you think of it?
Kids for Cash demands justice when innocence has been lost on a grand scale, and that's part of the problem. The film spends a large deal of time on these children who have been wronged at the hands of a corrupt judge and telling their stories. However, these come at the cost of getting the testimony of Mark Chevarella, who defiantly states repeatedly in the documentary that he did not take money in the scandal. That said, there's never enough time given for him to explain why he feels that way, and rather focuses on simply calling him a liar, as one parent does rather dramatically late in the film. And as Dan also mentioned, the metaphor, it makes sense once we go deeper into the actual story, but it does feel somewhat pretentious. Kids for Cash is a compelling documentary that just needed a bit more to round out the material, and I give it a B.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty much on the same page. I'm really glad I saw it.
Oh yeah, it was definitely worth a watch.
When I first heard about it, I didn't realize it was so close to home.
Neither did I. That threw me.
Yeah, which I guess explains why one of our local theaters got it. I mean, it's not in very wide release.
Yeah.
But,
so it definitely hit home with people around here more.
I would think so. I would think so. We saw it with a few people in the theater, and they were not happy with what was happening in the movie. It was a good one for sure. And that moves us into our home media moment, which is actually another documentary. This is the first show we've had 2 documentaries. This was up for Best Documentary Feature at the Academy Awards this weekend. And Justin actually had this on his Best of 2013 when we did the revised list on our mini-sode. For Joe and I, it would qualify for the 2014 list, since we didn't see it till this week. But we'll let Justin take the reins on that. The Act of Killing.
In 1965, Indonesian death squad leader Anwar Congo personally killed over 1,000 people during the Indonesian anti-communist purge that resulted in over 500,000 deaths. In the present, where Congo is now a paramilitary leader, director Joshua Oppenheimer has given Anwar and his allies the opportunity to reenact their killings from a number of cinematic influences as the lines between fact and fiction begin to horrifically blur together. I was rather vague about the reasoning behind the act of killing being my number 20 for Best of 2013 in the minisode for the sake of time, and I do apologize for that. The main reason this movie is truly so terrifying is because of how relevant the documentary truly is. Violence is littered all over media channels in the 21st century, and the film is truly no exception to the rule. Oppenheimer fearlessly films his subjects reenact their vicious killings and ensures that their seemingly unimaginable viciousness is well known to the public. The result is easily one of the most disturbing and unsettling over 2 hours cinematic experiences of 2013, but it's also one of the most important, not simply in the context of genocide, but in the glorification of the actions of these individuals that have the subjects themselves eventually being disgusted at their own intents when the power shifts. Admittedly, the film does run a bit long near the end, but The Act of Killing is a truly powerful and haunting documentary that was snubbed of a Best Documentary win at the Academy Awards, and I happily give it an A-.
Joe, what did you think? The Act of Killing.
Well, pretty much everything that Justin said I think hits the mark. It's a very chilling and surprisingly honest look at a part of history that is somewhat untalked about. The interviews really shocked me, and I thought the film had this kind of strangely hypnotic effect. The subject matter was just so fascinating in a kind of morbid way. It didn't really hold back, and I have to give it props for that. I do think that it did run on a bit long towards the end. Maybe that's because of the cut I watched. But I have to agree. I think that this one definitely should have gotten some more recognition from the Oscars. I think it's one that many people should see, much like 12 Years a Slave. I mean, it's just so disturbing, but it's so incredibly relevant, and I think it really tackles some very difficult subject matter that is really, really relevant. It's powerful and thought-provoking, and I happily would give this film an A.
The 12 Years a Slave comparison is, I think, very apt. It's a very intense film. It's hard to watch, but it is part of history. I mean, obviously, slavery is talked about in a general sense a lot more than the specific acts in this movie, but it's something that doesn't really get talked about. You know, when you think of genocide, you largely think of Hitler, obviously, and maybe a couple other people. But I mean, Anwar Congo, I never heard of him.
But there are just many pockets of genocide and just many hate crimes, that are just afflicted under the concept of war within countries and between countries since the fall of Nazi Germany. It's going on right now, and the media just kind of just sweeps it under the rug, and it's just one of those things that I think really needs to be brought to everyone's attention.
Yeah.
And this film really did a very accurate job, I think, of portraying that. And, like I said, it didn't hold back.
20 Feet from Stardom, like we talked about at the top of the show, won the Best Documentary Feature over this. I originally had that in my top 20 of 2013. When we did the revised list for the minisode, it had fallen off. But I think this movie far outshines it. I mean, be serious.
I kind of going along with sort of what we were talking about with the Oscars. I feel like they were kind of going a little safe once again, a slightly safe direction.
Yeah, well, and as we've talked about, we've touched on this on the show, but more we've talked about it in private. But the Oscar voters don't actually have to watch
everything,
the movies. Nobody, is forcing them or making sure that they do it. So it's very possible that the subject matter of this movie, turned off some of the voters, and they didn't even give it a watch, which I think is a shame. Mm-hmm. I had first heard of it, I guess, late in the summer, because Oppenheimer, the director, went on The Daily Show and was talking about it. I thought, that sounds interesting. I'll have to check that out when it comes out on DVD. Finally, it is out, and Justin recommended we watch it, and so we did. The very idea of the act of killing is so original and ingenious and fantastical that I can't believe Oppenheimer even pulled it off. It's at once startling, riveting, and bizarrely heartbreaking. That Oppenheimer was actually able to put a human face and an emotional center on basically pure evil is unbelievable. But you're left with this idea that maybe it isn't pure evil that we're looking at, and that's the bizarre genius of the movie. Maybe it's misunderstanding. This guy actually thought that he was doing the right thing, and that's the startling revelation of this movie. Mm-hmm. It's certainly not a film that everyone will be able to watch or enjoy like we talked about, and I'm not even sure if enjoy is the right word. But there's one scene that shows basically the entire crux of the movie. After Congo recreates one of his murders for the camera, he's watching it back, and the one comment he makes is about his pants and how they should have been. The sheer horror of the murder eluding him completely. And as it goes along, he starts to learn a little bit about how his victims felt, yet still not really getting it. But if nothing else, by the end, at least he's no longer proud of the genocide that he helped make a reality. The Act of Killing, to me, is a masterpiece. It is quite honestly the best documentary I've ever seen, and it's the only one that I have given an A+ to.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Justin, you didn't think I would like this.
I did not at all.
Because it's so violent, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so violent, so disturbing. I know you and I are definitely not of the same mind when it comes to documentaries, but I'm very impressed by your grade.
I think there's a difference, though, between the violence in this was violent, but
it was subversive.
Well, they were making a movie about the violence, and when you see a making of as opposed to the real thing, quote unquote, like the violence in, say, Lone Survivor, where I had to turn away a number of times, they make it a lot more realistic than Oppenheimer has Congo make it, because A, it's before any effects were added in or anything. So it's more of the idea of it, and because it really happened, I mean, I can handle that a little bit better, I think, than a lot of the gore, let's say, in some of the movies that I don't care for. So maybe that's the difference.
I can see it now.
But I loved it. It was fantastic.
Yeah, well, I thought it was very good. I do think it ran on a little long, but if it hadn't been for that, I would have given it an A+.
Nice.
It was very well done.
Yeah, I did not feel the length of it for some reason. I don't know. I was really riveted to it. And in fact, after I watched the movie, I went online and watched the clip of him on The Daily Show again, because obviously, originally I hadn't seen the movie, I hadn't even heard of it, and it was very interesting to hear, his thought process with everything. And John Oliver, who was hosting The Daily Show at the time, actually mentioned the pants scene that I thought was one of the best parts of the whole movie. So it struck him in the same way. So it's for sure recommended from all of us here.
Unquestionably.
So, all right, well, let's move on to our top 5, and we reviewed Nonstop a little bit earlier, so we are doing our top 5 movies that take place on an airplane, and we sort of decided, it had to be
50% of the movie.
At least 50% of the movie. There's obviously some great movies that have partial airplane scenes, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles maybe being among them. Mm-hmm. Bridesmaids, one of my favorites, has a great airplane scene, but that's all it is. So this is movies primarily on a plane, and Joe, let's start with you.
My number 5, no list of movies which are, I think, to some degree on my list, all action movies to some extent, would be complete without an appearance from Steven Seagal. So,
of course.
Hopefully the last time.
So, and this is kind of a joke, but my number 5 would be Executive Decision, in which he was only in about the first half hour. But, spoilers. But I thought this was a really good thriller, kind of actually in the vein of a Non-Stop, dealing with terrorism on an airplane. I thought that there were some good performances from none of my favorites, Kurt Russell and Oliver Platt, in kind of an unspoken role from him. I really enjoyed that one. I think that's one that a lot of people don't talk about very much, but they should. My number 4 is Con Air. It's a pretty goofy, over-the-top movie, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. I think it's probably one of Nick Cage's best so bad it's good performances, also with the pretty good villain by John Malkovich. Number 3 is one I've talked about before. It's Red Eye. Cillian Murphy plays one of the most vicious characters I've ever seen, and he really, really just gets you feeling for the main character and keeps you on the edge of your seat all the way up there, and you just realize that it's this tight, confined space with a killer, and I think it's an underrated movie. I've always enjoyed that one. Number 2 is one you probably see coming. It's Air Force One. I mean, get off my plane. It's iconic. Love it. Gary Oldman, great villain. And it's probably one of the best airplane-related movies ever. I'm sorry. It's just amazing. It really kind of permeates all aspects of every parody you possibly can make about the action genre, at least related to airplanes. But that's definitely my number 2.
And even Liam Neeson steals the line for the Lego movie, where he says, "Get off my train."
Except that time it was a train. That's right.
Yeah.
So it did have that impact.
It's definitely an iconic line.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, for my top 5, I actually start with Air Force One. That's my number 5. Just watched it today.
Did he get off that plane?
Eventually. Eventually, he got off that guy's plane. I thought it was good. I thought it was a little too,
cheesy?
Non-stop action-y and cheesy. I had told Justin earlier that I had, a little bit of a headache all day, and I don't get headaches, ever, so when I get a headache, it's annoying. All the constant gunfire was, a little bit much for me.
Yeah.
So I can't put it higher at this point because of that.
I thought it was fine.
But it was definitely, cheesy good.
It's cheesy good.
You know?
It's definitely
And Glenn Close, can't go wrong.
That's right.
Albert Nobbs himself.
I forgot about him. Yes, Glenn Close is in that one. Good job. Vice President, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good job.
I like that now that we mentioned Glenn Close, he says, I forgot about him.
Well, I'm sorry. She will forever be Albert Nobbs now. She's no longer Cruella DeVille. She's been replaced.
My number 4 is one that we watched for Oscar A to Z, and not Albert Nobbs. It is Airport. We covered this a few months ago when we did it for the Oscars, but it's a very, very good movie. You could see how it sort of set the template for all the disaster movies that would follow. My number 3 might be a little soon, but is Non-Stop.
Oh, yeah.
Really, really liked it.
You know what? Believe it or not, I contemplated it.
Is that right?
I did.
I thought it was a really good movie. Now, I don't know. It's hard to tell with movies like that how they hold up on repeat viewings once you know who done it and what's happening. Mm-hmm. So, it's hard to say if it will stand the test of time, but for now, I think it's a good number 3. My number 2 is United 93. Now, talk about a movie that is intense. Paul Greengrass at his finest, and just to shoot a movie, any movie really, in such a confined space, it has to be pretty intense. And in fact, I was watching maybe a commentary or a featurette on one of the Lost DVDs, and of course there's a few scenes in Lost that take place on a plane, and they were sort of talking about getting the angles and everything, and it seems very intricate to be able to do an entire movie on a plane in such a confined space. And Paul Greengrass, as we saw in Captain Phillips with the side boat thing,
he's kind of the director of small spaces.
He's good in a small space. And United 93 is certainly the crowning achievement of that. Justin, your top 5 favorite airplane movies.
Okay, number 5, Airport. What can I say? It's a classic filled with great performances. The various stories never cease to draw interest, and it's truly at its best during the suspenseful climax, but unfortunately that doesn't come until, as I mentioned, relatively late in the film. Number 4 is Air Force One, easily one of the best action films of the 90s. It's both fun and suspenseful, and even though it doesn't get talked about too much, as Joe mentioned, the infamous line, "Get off my plane," has since become iconic.
It's true.
Yeah.
Number 3 is Snakes on a Plane.
Oh, yeah. I knew it.
It is an absolutely brilliant guilty pleasure. It is so completely out of its mind that one can't help but be entertained by it. And deep down, we're all sick of these monkey-fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane.
Worst edit.
This is why you don't edit things for TV. And number 2, United 93.
Oh.
While I have a love-hate relationship with the work of director Paul Greengrass, a man I truly call the man who ruined Bourne, this is easily his most hard-hitting film. Despite only a few big-name actors in the film, it's often benefited from the lesser-known actors doing their roles. It's intense, it's emotional, but it's easily one of the greatest real-life heroic sacrifices in my lifetime that is a story more than well worth being told.
Sometimes you need that, though. I think if Tom Hanks or Matt Damon, Paul Greengrass's other collaborators, were on that plane, United 93, like, it would take you completely out of the drama. It was one of the most intense, dramatic films I've ever seen.
No question.
Yeah.
Before we go on, I have to say, I have never seen United 93. So,
Wow.
So,
It's really good.
Yeah.
I was a bit dissuaded at the time because I kind of felt like it was a bit too soon to be making movies about it. Because I think there was another one, World Trade Center, which was not as good.
Yeah.
Movie.
So, I mean, I've thought about it, but I've heard good things, especially from you guys, so I'm more inclined to check it out now.
So much better than World Trade Center.
Really? Because I saw a bit of World Trade Center, as I was a bit underwhelmed by that one.
That one has a story that sounds good on paper. It just doesn't work as well in actual execution.
Sadly.
Yeah, but United 93 I cannot recommend enough, and it's on Instant too, so...
I did see
check
that. I'll have to check it out soon. I will, yes. My number 1 is actually a little different from the rest of my list, and that's Dr. Strangelove, or How to Learn to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. A large part of this movie does take place on a plane. It's actually... I think it really focuses a lot on just the entire paranoia and the ridiculousness of the Cold War. It's just a really smart commentary, and it's kind of darkly humorous, but honestly, my favorite parts of the movie are the more serious moments, the disturbing moments on the plane when one of the pilots has to make a terrible decision to equal things out, and it's actually kind of sad and depressing, and it shows how horrific war is, and I think in those tight spaces, I mean, you get an early James Earl Jones performance.
Wow.
I believe one of his first.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I believe so.
And, it's really just an awesome testament to great filmmaking by Stanley Kubrick. And I think it's a classic, and it is a great movie about an airplane, whether you're on it or off it. I mean, and that iconic scene where the cowboy rides down on the nuke, I mean, it's going to be ingrained in everybody's minds forever in cinema, I think. So, definitely my number 1.
Absolutely.
Cool. Good choice. My number 1 is Airplane. This is among the greatest parody movies ever. The Zucker brothers, one of their other films, The Naked Gun, is my personal favorite. But Airplane has more iconic lines than probably any other comedy, at least of the 80s. None that I can think of. I mean, between Stewardess, I Speak Jive, and Have you ever seen a grown man naked? I mean, there's just so many lines, and it really set the template, much like Airport did for the disaster movie. Airplane set the tone for all of these spoof movies, and for a while they were really, really good. I mean, people that are growing up now and only know, like, you know, epic movie and a haunted house and vampires suck. I mean, this is not where it's at.
No.
You need to go to the 80s and you watch Airplane, The Naked Gun, Hot Shots. I mean, the Zucker brothers really had their pulse on how to do parody properly.
Back in the day, they really were higher quality spoof movies.
I completely agree. And what the genius of Airplane is, and I don't think people realize this now, but everybody pretty much that was in that movie, at least all the leads, were these super serious, dramatic actors. Leslie Nielsen was a hardcore, dramatic actor, and here he is saying these crazy lines, and then it stuck, and he became the parody guy. But, you know, Robert Stack, like, all these people in this movie were, you know, known for their drama, and that's almost as brilliant as the writing of the movie, to have them cast that way. Justin, what's your number one?
Well, big surprise here. It is also Airplane.
Oh,
I thought
very
so.
nice.
There aren't many times I can say a movie has so many good jokes in it that you have to see it more than one time, but Airplane is truly one of them. There are so many blink and you miss it. You owe it to the movie itself to actually rewatch it for those jokes. Leslie Nielsen, as Dan mentioned, who was a serious actor. I just saw him a couple years back when he was in Forbidden Planet. Was a comedy genius, and this truly proves it. It is an absolute comedy classic that still stands the test of time and is quite possibly the gold standard for all parody movies.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's a lot like a John Lithgow. Like, in the 80s, he did all these super, awful, cruel characters, dramas, and then he does Third Rock from the Sun, and it turns out he's also hilarious.
And then they get the best of both in Shrek.
Exactly. and I think...
Yes.
So good. I'm glad you put that at your number one, Justin.
I haven't seen that one in a long time. So if I watched it recently, it probably would have made it.
And to speak to what you said about that, Justin, about the repeat viewings, I can't even imagine seeing it in a theater back in 1980. You would have missed a third of the lines because the theater would just have been uproarious with laughter.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, Joe, we're going to move on to our triple feature, and that starts with you this week. The new classic is Goon.
All right. Goon stars Sean William Scott as Doug, a simple-minded hockey fan who, after brawling with an opposing team member, he is picked up to be part of the Major League Hockey team to become what is known as the title suggests, a goon. Basically, a hockey team member who is there pretty much to defend other players and beat the living crap out of the opposite ones. And this kind of ultimately leads to a rivalry with a legendary goon played by Liev Schreiber. And there's also a subplot involving his romance with a woman who is, sadly, with another man but has a deep affection for hockey players. This movie took a while to get going. I honestly found the first half or so either just dumb and unfunny or just offensive. However, once it gets going, I think the basic message of the film is a good one, with a rather unique twist, and is held together by a honestly good performance from Sean William Scott, who I always love to see, and it's always a pleasure. I wish he'd do more things. I also thought that Liev Schreiber did a good job as well in the opposite role, playing sort of the antagonist for the movie, and it ultimately leads to a pretty decent climax. Still, the first half of the movie was a bit of a struggle for me to get through, and I give it a C+.
Alright. I agree with you, though. I think Sean William Scott is a completely underappreciated actor.
He is.
He doesn't even show up that much. It's not like he cranks out 4 movies a year.
I was thinking, I know that he did this, and has he done much since then?
Well, his main role, obviously, is Stifler in the American Pie movies and The Stoner and Dude, Where's My Car?
Honestly, besides American Pie, I know him best from Bulletproof Monk, which is a movie that I like.
Oh, okay. I've never seen that.
Where he actually gets to show his chops as an action star with Cheyenne Fenton. I thought it was a pretty entertaining movie, personally. I liked it, and honestly, after that, I think this is the first thing I've seen him in since then.
Well, what happened with a lot of the American Pie cast is, unfortunately, they got cast in, all these, stupid movies. Dukes of Hazzard he was in Mr. Woodcock.
Who's the gentleman that played the main character?
Jason Biggs.
Biggs. I believe he was in a couple other films of similar vein, and then he disappeared.
He has a supporting role now on Orange is the New Black.
That's true.
On Netflix. But, he had a sitcom for a year. Yet none of them really, except for Allison Hannigan, who, of course, got How I Met Your Mother and was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer at the time of American Pie, nobody really broke out that much from those movies. And it's a shame because it had a lot of talent in it.
It did.
And I'll tell you a great Sean William Scott movie that, for me, was the first time I had seen him in a few years, was Role Models.
Never heard of it.
Oh, it's him and Paul Rudd. It's a comedy. They get in trouble with the law, and the court sentences them. It's such a stupid premise, but the court sentences them to do community service at this, Big Brothers kind of thing. And it's really, really funny. If you're a fan of Sean William Scott, I would recommend it.
Okay, sure.
It's very funny. But he definitely needs more roles like the one in Goon and Role Models.
I think he's an underappreciated actor.
I do too.
Absolutely.
Goon is fresh and funny, and it may have a little bit of a slow start, but I think it belongs on the list of solid sports comedies. Some of the bloodiness is a little too much for me for a comedy, and the story itself is a bit thin, which lends itself to repetition as it goes on, but Goon gets a B from me. Justin?
Hockey's naturally a violent sport, and never since the film Slapshot has its gory brutality been put to such great comedic use. Instead of playing his usual smart aleck type character, as we've noted as Stifler in American Pie, actor Sean William Scott portrays somewhat of a down-to-earth everyman, who just happens to be really good at hitting people. His deadpan humor throughout the film gives a certain heart the film needs to balance out the viciousness and some of the lesser-developed characters, such as the annoying but occasionally funny antics from his brother, played by Jay Baruchel. While the film does fall into ridiculousness on more than a couple occasions, and the finale is absolutely not for the squeamish, Goon still manages to retain a certain charm that kept me laughing amidst the sheer manic carnage in the rink. It's not going to be a fun ride for everyone, but for those who love comedies and have a strong stomach, Goon is well worth a watch, and I give it a B.
Yeah, I forgot about the Jay Baruchel. I love Jay Baruchel.
Yeah.
He does a good job in this.
He had his moments.
He doesn't have much to do in it.
Nah.
It's clearly a supporting role, but I thought he was funny. But yeah, he really, Sean William Scott really does play like an everyman. I could see them, like if they made this year, having like Chris Pratt be in it. You know, he seems to be doing the whole everyman thing right now.
Yeah.
Especially with the Lego movie.
Well, that's totally his role.
The ultimate everyman.
Yeah, the ultimate everyman, Emmett. But I would love to see Sean William Scott do more things, and you know, I thought Goon was funny. Certainly one that you don't hear talked about. It was very under the radar when it came out. And Liev Schreiber's always good to see.
Yeah, he did a good job as well. I always liked him.
Yeah. Not that he was in it all that much either, but when they got
like
their rivalry going.
They had some good chemistry, and I feel like when he came in, his scenes, he steals the show.
He does. And I also thought that Sean William Scott's chemistry with a lot of his teammates was good.
Yeah.
Those were some of my favorite scenes in the movie, like just when they were in the locker room and he was either getting to know them or they were getting pumped up for the next game. Or
The man has good comedic timing for sure.
Yeah, he does. All right, well, up next is our old classic of the week, and that was chosen by me, and we did Baby Boom for this week. Diane Keaton is J.C. Wyatt, a New York career woman who's told by her boss that she cannot have it all. But she actually doesn't want it all. The kids, her career, her personal life, she just wants the career. Even her relations have stalled with her boyfriend, played by Harold Ramis, which, upon the awful news of his passing last week, is why I chose to run this film. However, when a cousin JC hasn't even seen in 30 years dies, she inherits a toddler from said cousin, and though initially attempting to put the baby up for adoption, she realizes that she's really grown attached, and in trying to juggle everything, she loses her boyfriend and her job. Starting anew in Vermont in a house desperately in need of a fix-up, JC, ever career-minded, starts selling organic baby food made from the apples in her orchard to stop her from going broke. The film is funny and a reminder that you can have an entirely clean movie and still be funny. There were a couple minor sex jokes, but not much else. This was a PG-rated film. Keaton is very likable, though the more frantic her character gets, she does start to grate a bit. The twins playing baby Elizabeth, Christina and Michelle Kennedy, are some of the cutest and funniest baby actors I've seen, and of course you wish Ramis didn't leave the picture so early, because obviously you always want more of him in everything. The story fades a little bit in the final scenes once JC meets a veterinarian played by a virtually unrecognizable Sam Shepard, and the film has an incredibly frustrating, predictable conclusion. It's also filled with the obligatory 80s montages set to corny music. But overall, it's easy to see why this was a breakout hit in 1987 and even garnered a television series version the following year. And, you know, like a lot of the 80s films we talk about, if this were released today, the grade would be a bit less, but in context, I give Baby Boom a B+. Justin, what'd you think?
Diane Keaton has proven her acting abilities over decades, so why in the 80s did she decide to do this dry and forgettable comedy will be forever lost on this reviewer. That's not to say that Keaton's necessarily bad in the film, but rather seems out of place. While there is some humor to be had with the adorable Tyke, these moments are very spaced out in the entire film, which makes its near 2-hour time feel a bit much. However, what the film does do rather well is make great use of some of the actors in bit roles, particularly the townspeople during the film's second and third act. It's nothing particularly standout, and Harold Ramis is completely useless, but it does give Baby Boom some of the feel-good quirkiness it's striving for, and for that, I'll give it a C.
Holy mackerel.
You can dislike the movie, but Harold Ramis was not wasted. He was funny in it, in the few scenes that he was in.
We needed more of him. He was the best part.
Definitely wanted more Harold Ramis.
I agree, but his character was completely useless.
Not really. I
disagree
think
with that.
that factors in with her character development, but would you like me to...
I think he had some good lines.
He had some good lines. I'd say he kind of contrasted with Keaton pretty well.
Yeah.
They had good, decent chemistry. Well, I'll go to my review.
Please do. I can't wait to hear.
All right. Diane Keaton gives a good performance as a career woman struggling with single parenthood and managing to make it all work. The late Harold Ramis is funny as well, but sadly leaves the film fairly soon. And boy, has Sam Shepard aged, because he was completely unrecognizable. I don't know. I honestly had to do a double take because I did not realize that was him.
You could tell the voice. The voice is still the same, a little more gravelly now, but...
The voice and, like, the hairline, but that was about it. Like, he looked like a completely different person.
God bless him, but he has not aged well in 25 years.
Not as well as some people, no. But still a good actor. This movie is a good balance of funny, witty, and mostly honest storytelling that is very enjoyable 2/3 of the way through. Once we get to the third act, though, it does lose quite a bit of steam and falls into a pretty corny, predictable ending. It is very 80s, but it is a good movie overall, and I give it a B.
Joe, good one. Justin didn't care for it.
Not really.
No.
Sorry, Dan.
Doesn't affect me. I mean, listen, I know you in comedies, and dated comedies in particular don't seem to hold much water with you, I've noticed. The ones that I've had you go back and watch, like a Wayne's World, for example, I don't know if it's generational or you just... I mean, I haven't seen Wayne's World in a while. I don't know really how dated it is.
I think Mike Myers is always funny.
I think Mike Myers is hilarious. Dana Carvey's hilarious. Bohemian Rhapsody, you can't go wrong.
Oh, don't get me wrong. That's the best scene in the entire movie.
But I do find that with you, that I think you tend not to give benefit of the doubt, maybe, to certain older, at least in comedies. Dramas, not so much.
And yet one of his favorite films is Sleeper.
Yeah, but that's an artsy comedy, and it's Woody Allen. So it's like, there's a difference. You know what I mean? Like,
I honestly don't know where you're getting this I love Woody Allen thing, because I'm pretty split on his movies.
He thinks that because it's more critically well-received.
It's a critically well-received comedy. It's an artsy comedy. Baby Boom is not.
And yet, if you look at Woody Allen's... the movies that people talk about from Woody Allen, Sleeper probably wouldn't even make the top 5.
Let me ask you, I was wondering, is it possible that maybe your viewing of this movie... I know you're familiar with Keaton probably a lot from Woody Allen. Do you feel she's utilized better in Woody Allen movies? Like, I know you don't really like Annie Hall that much.
I don't, but I do think she was... I did like her in Annie Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I think just for this one, it's... honestly, datedness of a movie doesn't bother me that much. It's when writing is weak and just not that funny. Like, I thought her role in this was really dry, really draggy. As I mentioned before, I thought the entire bit with Harold Ramis was completely pointless. I do like Harold Ramis. I think he's funny. I think if he had been in a larger portion of the movie and they actually built up his character, it would have easily gotten a B for me.
Well, I'm just going to offer the suggestion that I think that your problem with the movie might have just been a tonal issue. Like, you think that she was dry, you think the writing was dry and unfunny, but I think it was just a type of humor. It's supposed to be kind of dry. And to be honest, as far as being dated, I've seen some 80s movies, like Secret of My Success, that are far more 80s.
I agree. I think the most dated thing about this movie is the, 3 montages.
But even I thought...
pretty montage-heavy.
They were, but I mean, I've seen worse. We all have.
I have.
Well, the only reason I brought up the dated matter is because Dan cited that as a criticism for some of my other movies. Obviously, he knows I was also not a big fan of Reality Bites, which...
Reality Bites is super dated. It's in my top 25 of all time. Love it, but I was graduating high school when it came out. It meant a lot to me, but it is super dated, which I told you going into it.
Super 90s.
Wayne's World I thought you would like. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I think it's decent.
Oh, don't get me wrong, there are some bits in Wayne's World that I do think are legitimately funny. The product placement scene is great. Bohemian Rhapsody, enough said.
What did you give it, though?
Probably around the same grade. I mean, it's not so much that the movie isn't funny. It's the problem I have with it is it's basically 90 minutes of sketch comedy that's tied together with a really, really thin premise.
But you do like Seth MacFarlane's stuff.
I do, to some extent.
I think you really like
That's
his
a good
stuff,
point.
Which is basically his shtick for his few films.
He made one movie. One's not even out in theaters yet.
It's done. It's coming out. He made 2 movies. It's a few.
Well, one that we can grade anyway.
Okay.
And that was full of,
For that,
basically,
I will accept that point.
strung together sketch comedy with a general plot around it.
Well, you also saw the unrated version, so.
I did, but I feel like that's basically what it was, just less watered down.
I don't know. I thought Harold Ramis was utilized well here.
Like I said, my only issue was I wish they would have worked him into the plot a little longer.
He had some good lines.
Yeah, I thought he was funny. Honestly, I thought he was one of the best parts of the movie.
Yeah.
And like I said, honestly, if it wasn't for that third act, where it kind of just loses something, kind of gets a little too schmaltzy.
And Joe, that's where I teetered on a B versus B plus also, because I felt like the end was a letdown.
For me, I think that affected more. But I'd say mostly through the movie, I was thinking B plus would be an appropriate grade, taking into context the time. But yeah, that last part, just especially the ending, which was just unbelievably
ridiculous,
stupid.
Yeah,
practically, and just
I agree.
Narratively speaking.
How cute was that kid, though?
You know, I did not
Best part
know
of the movie.
that was portrayed by twin babies.
That's what they usually do with babies.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
Full House.
Do they just? Is that utilizing different shots with different babies? Like one plays like the more mellow, the more action.
Well, that was part of the reason for the Olsen twins on Full House. One was a little more mellow, and one was more energetic. But a lot of time, it's for the hours that they can work too, because they're babies.
Honestly, that might be the best baby or baby's performance I've seen.
I think so.
Like it was like she just had magic. She must have had talent for it.
She was very funny.
She was good.
And her and Diane Keaton, as much chemistry as you could have with a baby.
There was something there.
They had good fake mother-daughter chemistry.
Like you could see, like how could you turn away from that baby? You know?
Yeah.
It would be difficult, very difficult.
I agree. All right, well, let's move on here. Our final film is Alibi. That's our Oscar A to Z movie. This is the oldest film that we've done so far on Film Fanatics. It's a 1929 film that was nominated for Best Actor for Chester Morris, Best Art Direction, and Best Picture at the second ever Academy Awards. And what's even more impressive, these 3 nominations are out of only 7 categories. They only had 7 awards back then.
So this was a big one back then.
This was a huge movie back then in 1929. Justin, tell us about Alibi.
Tell us about the hit.
Chick Williams, played by Chester Morris, has been recently released from prison and begins to rejoin his old gang. However, when a policeman gets murdered during a bank robbery, Chick gets called back into question as both sides of the law begin to play dirty in an attempt to uncover the truth. Alibi has both the blessing and the curse of being a film ahead of its time during a turning point in cinema. The silent film era was coming to an end, and talking pictures were continuing to take off, causing actors and filmmakers to rethink their entire methods. In the case of Alibi, it truly has the best of both new and old worlds of filmmaking. The movie rightfully lives up to being called the first American expressionist film, with large expansive set pieces and a surreal tone feel, reminiscent of German silent films like Fritz Lang's Metropolis and the other great surrealistic film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. However, with this great cultural impact, Alibi largely suffers from its actors still heavily rooted in their silent film days, and as such, their acting of emotions is very explicit, particularly as we kept mentioning through our viewing of a character supposedly being a drunk. This is a pity because Alibi takes a number of really clever twists and turns with its telling in under an hour and a half. It doesn't necessarily make the film unbearable so much as it keeps it from being a great piece of influential cinema that it deserves to be. For the film flaws and all, it's still a great noir well worth a watch, provided anyone can find a decent restoration of it, and I give it a B+.
Alibi really is a good thriller. I mean, it keeps you guessing. But like you mentioned, it's a very old print of the movie. I don't believe that it has ever been fully restored, even though it is on DVD. And we even lost about 3 minutes in the middle because the DVD wasn't working because it's kind of on a low-budget label. it would have been nice to see the entire film. I don't think we missed anything major in those couple minutes, but also we missed out on some of the dialogue because if you've seen Singing in the Rain, you know this. You really had to speak into the microphones when giving a line when sound came to film, but not all of the actors apparently got the memo, and we lost some lines in the process. People were sort of speaking off mic, and we had to piece a little bit together of what they were saying. But I think it's just nice that 85-year-old movies that most people have never heard of are even able to be seen in 2014. Mm-hmm. I think Morris did a good job as the lead, and one of the supporting actors, Regis Toomey, who played Danny McGann, seemed like he was doing a terrible acting job for the longest time with the drunk routine, but then we see why towards the climax, and turns out he was actually doing a pretty good job. But to echo Justin, the set pieces and the design was great. You can easily see how it was up for Best Art Direction. And yeah, it sort of blended both of those worlds together very well. The silent world and the first couple of years of talkies. I also give Alibi a B+. Joe?
In addition to some social commentary about the dark recesses of the police system, there was some exploration to the ugly side of romance and the violence of the criminal underworld, which is pretty much unmuted for the time. There is also a fairly compelling mystery and honestly good acting. Most notable is the tone of the film, which includes an odd atmosphere with experimental music, sound techniques, and various camera angles, enhancing with shadows and some interesting editing techniques as well. And it is really, as you guys mentioned, a really cool, quirky fusion from the silent era into the sound era. And we kind of saw some of the struggles that they had, but in a weird way, it's kind of just interesting from a film history standpoint, kind of seeing how it really does turn out to be a pretty good film despite these issues, and it kind of makes it really interesting from that perspective. Plus, as you guys mentioned, a lot of interesting advances in that experimentation, much like Fritz Lang's techniques, I think is very telling as well. And I always kind of like that surrealistic atmosphere, as Justin knows. I really believe this one is a hidden gem, and it's really ahead of its time. It's a great noir-style film, and I would happily recommend it. I think it really should be seen by a lot more people, and I would also give it a B+.
Yeah, I don't know how well it can be restored. I mean, certainly the picture, but I don't know, the way those people were talking off mic and stuff, I don't know how you would properly restore something like that, which is a shame.
There definitely are ways that they can adjust sound levels, and I feel like if somebody took the time and effort, they probably could improve it even more than we saw. I didn't think the restoration we got was honestly very good.
Not at all.
I think we watched Algiers, and that was pretty grainy and rough, but overall we still got most of the movie.
Yeah. This was probably the roughest we've seen.
Yeah, and there were like huge clips of sound that were just completely skipped, and I was like...
Well, we tried to turn on the captioning too, but...
There were no captions.
Like I said, it was kind of a cheap company that made the DVD.
I'm not sure if they could dig up an old script, but you could probably piece together as much as you could, do some lip movements to watch it. I feel like they could recreate it and come up with some subtitles. I thought that was, for a film that is this old and historically important, that got some serious nominations.
Yeah.
I think it's worth it.
I do too.
I'm surprised Criterion hasn't jumped on it.
Yeah, I think it's just a really good advance. It's a good film, and it should be appreciated more, especially for people that like the old noir style.
Yeah, it was a very good noir, and even the scenes of like the dance numbers and stuff, where it's like, okay, obviously they put this in here because it's the first couple of years of talkies and music and movies is all the rage.
It weren't that bad.
It didn't distract from the story at all, because part of it took place at like this dance club, where they were performing like Rockette style numbers and stuff. I don't know. I thought it all came together very well. Alibi is the name of it, and we got it right off of Netflix, DVD by mail. So if you're a Netflix subscriber, you may be able to get that one. And want to put out the call for listeners' choice for Old Classic, which we'll be doing in just a couple of weeks. So if you have a movie you'd like us to review on the show here for Old Classic, the only rule is it has to be more than 2 years old, and ideally you would have to honestly like it. We don't want to watch stinkers.
We can't control that, but
we
please
can't control that. But
try to send us one you like.
Do us a solid.
Be honest with us.
So we'll do that in a couple of weeks, so you can just let us know on the YouTube in the comment section. You could write to us on Facebook. And speaking of which, our Facebook group is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. We have some new members on there, which is always good to see. And we post our 5-word reviews there every single week. Joe, you've got your YouTube channel up. I know there's a Pompeii video up right now.
Yes, my friend Alex and I went to see Pompeii together, and we did a brief little review kind of expanding on some of those ideas, and it's a fairly entertaining video. I'd say check it out, and we should have another There Goes Tokyo up, and also recently posted a Naruto analysis video for you guys.
Very cool. And There Goes Tokyo is the Godzilla build-up. The countdown to the new Godzilla with you and Justin. So.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, very, very cool stuff there. And you can add us on Twitter as well. The account is @FilmFanaticsPod. That's going to do it for this week. We will see you back here next week on the show. Thanks for listening. Bye.